Welcome everyone to the Podcast Leadership, the Visionaries session today. I'm delighted to be moderating this session. My name is Kathy Doyle. I'm the Vice President of Podcasts at Macmillan Publishers in New York, where we have 2 podcast networks, and we've been continuously podcasting since 2007. We have Quick and Dirty Tips, which is our short format, subject matter expert hosted weekly shows. And then we have a second network called Macmillan Podcasts, where we open up shows to a variety of different Macmillan authors across various imprints using different formats, different genres. And I'm very happy to be here today. So our panelists are truly the visionaries. That name does not lie. They are leaders in our space. They are some of the people who've really helped create and develop this nascent but rapidly growing industry into what it is today. So I'm super excited to hear what they have to say. I hope you will be too. Before we dig in, I just want to give a big thank you to Victor Harwood, Consumer Electronics Show, and of course, Digital Hollywood for bringing us all together today. And I'd also like to give our panelists, of course, the opportunity to introduce themselves and give you a little bit of context in terms of how they came to the industry and where their companies stand today. So Chris, why don't we start with you?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you, Kathy, for moderating and this panel and everyone participating. I know it's kind of crazy times right now, but it's good to be with everyone. So my name is Chris Corcoran. I'm the Chief Content Officer and one of the original founders of Cadence 13. We launched our company back in 2015, so it's been great to see the space evolve to what it is today and continues to evolve. And Entercom was one of the early investors in our company. They ended up acquiring us outright back in late 2019. They also acquired Pineapple Street Studios around the same time that they acquired us. And so the core mission at Cadence 13, just a quick overview, has always been leading with talent and our shows itself. Those are always the brands that are of importance to us, and we surround our team with those ones. And we've always kind of mirrored that HBO mindset of, Richard Plepler always said that, the curation of excellence. And it's not always that more is necessarily better, but better is better. And we've always gone about that mentality. And we've built our company with the infrastructure that houses all sides of the business, from production, development, studios, sales, marketing, and distribution, and then a real team of experts behind all of those. And so we've done a number of talent and content divisions. Our core C13 network, which is Crooked Media and Goop and Andrew Yang and JJ Redick and Kevin Durant, Unsolved Mysteries and those shows. And then our influencer business, which is really massive, David Dobrik and Emma Chamberlain and those types of shows. And then C13 Originals, our documentary business of gangster capitalism and a bunch of shows like that. And then soon to announce C13 Features. So that's really us in a nutshell.
Terrific. Sarah?
Hello, I am Sarah Van Mosel. I'm Chief Revenue Officer at Stitcher. If you're not familiar with Stitcher, we represent about 22% of the US podcast listening audience. We have amazing shows like Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend, My Favorite Murder, Office Ladies, Freakonomics, Hidden Brain. We were recently acquired, as recent as October, by SiriusXM and Pandora. So now we're part of a wider audio family that includes SoundCloud and AdsWiz and Simplecast in terms of a hosting and distribution platform. We're about to launch in the next couple of weeks our first sort of unified new show as a part of the Stitched Together organization, Inside Jokes with Kevin Hart, which we're really excited about. So I'm bringing the revenue perspective to the table today, having held revenue and ad sales positions within companies like WNYC, where I got my start. Also launched the US sales operation of Acast, and also set up the national team for sales for PRX and Radiotopia and Market Ingenuity. So I'm here to talk about the money.
Thanks, Sarah.
Sure.
Hi, thank you for having me, Kathy, and it's a pleasure to be here with all my co-panelists and all of you, and you guys make this industry such an amazing place to work in. I'm Hernan Lopez. I started Wondery almost exactly 5 years ago this week. Wondery is a company that creates narrative, serialized storytelling podcasts and also represent ongoing interview-style shows. And we're known for the kind of shows that really get people immersed into the shoes of the characters. Shows like Dr. Death and Dirty John and The Shrink Next Door. Many of those shows have been optioned for television. In fact, we have 19 of our shows overall being optioned and some of them being produced for television. And we have created a style of storytelling that over the last 5 years, I created 30 number one shows on Apple Podcasts, the latest one being Do No Harm, which we did in cooperation with NBC News. On the partnership side of our business, so our business is similar to K-13s in that some of our shows are regional, some are partners. We essentially help creators like Real Crime Profile or School of Greatness monetize their inventory through advertising, as well as licensing and distribution. We recently launched an app, the Wondery app, and on the Wondery app, people can subscribe to ad-free versions of all of the Wondery original partner shows. And very recently, we signed an agreement to be acquired by Amazon, something I'm sure is going to be Kathy's first question. And we're really excited about that agreement. Obviously, it hasn't closed yet. We're in the process of between signing and closing, but we're really excited about the future and what it means for Wondery and for its listeners.
Terrific. Connell?
Sure. This is a heck of a panel. These are amazing people. I'm psyched to be on this panel. A lot of these folks are friends of mine, but thanks for including me. I am Connell Byrne. I run podcasting for Iheart Radio. I got into podcasting a long time ago, 2009 or 10 or so. Launched a bunch of shows like Stuff You Should Know. Those grew into a company called Stuff Media, and Stuff Media was acquired by Iheart Radio in 2018. And we sort of became a big bolt-on. Like we became what we call the Iheart Podcast Network, the whole Iheart division dedicated to podcasting. We have about 500 shows that we call sort of our national or bigger shows, still publishing Stuff You Should Know, but we've added a lot more shows to it. And we're, depending on the month, somewhere between 250 and 300 million downloads a month. So a nice big volume of inventory. And it's been an awesome year. I can't wait to talk about it because it's been unpredictable in all the good ways that podcasting is known to be, but that's sort of how I got here.
Awesome. Certainly last but not least, Moses.
Hi, thanks, Kathy. Thanks for having me on this panel with all these great people. It's great to be with you all. I'm Moses Schoyola. I am the president of Other Tone, which is Pharrell Williams' podcast company. We just launched our first show last month, which is Other Tone with Pharrell, Scott, and Fam, and we'll be developing and launching a slew of other shows over the course of the next year and on to the future. Before Other Tone, I ran podcasting at Endeavor Audio, where we launched shows like Blackout and the Bellas, the WWE Podcast Network, and several others. And then before that, I ran business development at Megaphone, the platform that was just acquired by Spotify, the hosting and distribution platform and ad insertion platform that was just acquired by Spotify. So got my start in the space about 5 years ago, and it's been a wild ride over the last 5 years. And I'm excited to see what the next 5 and 10 and 15 and 20 hold. So excited to talk about it.
Pretty amazing. Well, when I look at this panel, we virtually have every aspect of this industry covered, whether it's in your current roles or some of the past roles that you guys referenced. So it's really fascinating to me. Let's start there. Let's start with the different aspects of this business. You know, Connell referenced the fact that 2020 was a wild year. Of course, we have the pandemic. We had so much unrest, but podcasting had a pretty great year. You know, listenership took a dip, but then it recovered. Revenues are recovering. We've seen more on the front of discovery, and our audiences have grown. Hernan, you mentioned the fact that in the last breaths of 2020, we officially learned that Amazon Music was in the process of acquiring Wondery. Let's start there. And I'd like all of you, you've all been part of major acquisitions and changes in the industry over the last year or 2 years. But Hernan, let's start with you and give us a little more context and perspective. What do you think this means for creators, our community? You know, what do you think deals like this that we've seen so many of course, this one being among the largest, what do they mean? What do they mean for creators?
I think it's something really exciting for the podcast community because when I started Wondery 5 years ago, it was really difficult to get traction whenever you were trying to raise money, whenever you were trying to get the attention of advertisers. So Sarah, Moses, Connell, were all, you guys were all in podcasts before I was, and you know this better than I do. What we podcasts weren't getting a lot of love, to be honest. And over the last several years, have we seen more listeners, more content, more options for listening. we've seen podcasts take their rightful space in the minds of advertisers, in the minds of listeners, in the minds of investors, in the minds of the various players in the media ecosystem. And what I find really exciting about Amazon is that it's very well known. It's the most customer-centric company in the world, and it's a company that really puts customer first. And all of the initiatives that we had under Wondery as an independent small company, after all, are going to be put in front of more customers, more listeners all over the world as a result of us partnering with Amazon.
Awesome. Anybody else want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I think I can add, first of all, congrats. It's incredible. And I think it's great for the space. I think consolidation happens in any space that continues to accelerate, but there's also still a lot of amazing independent creators out there, the Campsides, the QCodes that are doing pretty incredible stuff. But I think it shows, especially in a pandemic year, that, podcasting and audio in general is kind of in the golden age, if you will, and just getting better. And it's not a zero-sum game. That everyone has their own differentiating factor for, what they're creating, what they're trying to create and do, and accelerating their own business. But at the end of the day, I think it's great because we all push each other in this community to build better content. And at the end of the day, that's what it's about. It's not just about the networks. It's okay, how do we get people to gravitate towards these shows and grow audience and invest in these? So I think it's awesome to see all these acquisitions and big things. There's a lot of attention on it because of the IP, but it's really good content and people are gravitating towards this space in droves, not just domestically, but internationally as well.
I think the piece of the puzzle that our acquisition sort of bolted into place, for me at least, was scale, right? So Stitcher was cooking along, doing great, doing our thing. And, along came this entity that had great, deep relationships on the SiriusXM side. Everybody knows them for Howard Stern, but they have deep, deep roads into comedy and sports and entertainment. And then on the Pandora side, this is an enormous, organization. If they bill $1.2 billion a year. And so imagine all of the data and the ad tech and all of the sort of nuanced ways that they've developed over time to sort of get in there and really target and serve their advertisers well. My job at this point is to sort of take podcasting to that next level in a way that only podcasting can go. And I have, I'm sure we all have thoughts about the care and safety that we feel around the medium in terms of protecting it, in terms of privacy and user experience and all of those very important pieces. But I think, the trend in consolidation in many of these cases is really toward scale, right? Listeners are there, and now we're sort of taking it to that next level so that, the monetization can really follow.
Connell, can you speak to how radio might fall into that?
Yeah, I think, first of all, fundamentally, it's really just not that often that a whole new content type comes along and takes hold. And more often than not, new content types come and go, or at least come and don't reach mass scale. Like VR is a decent example that I think for a moment there we thought VR would permeate every aspect of all of our lives, and maybe it will still in 50 or 100 years, but it's sort of settled into a niche community more, at least of maybe gamers. Podcasting is different. It seems like it is actually a mass reach medium that is here to stay and won't stop growing. You have 100 million Americans a month now listening to a podcast. During pandemic, you have sort of a super fan base of podcast listeners that we track too. They went from about 6 hours and 15 minutes a week to 6 hours and 45 minutes a week. That's an amazing stat for a group of people who found a way with their lives completely disrupted and the places that they listened to podcasts gone, commutes, exercise routines, all that stuff blown up. It still found a way to gather more real estate in those folks' lives to listen even more than before. So when I think about podcasting and radio, back to your question, I think of okay, this still feels like the first or second inning. Radio reaches 9 out of 10 American adults month. It is truly mass reach. Why? Because radio is always on. It actually hasn't declined too much in terms of its reach. So when I think about podcasting, at 1 out of 3 Americans a month now listening to a podcast, I think about number one, because I have radio on the mind, being part of a radio company now. Number one, I think about what about the other two? And so how do I get to 2 out of 3, or maybe 2.5 out of 3 Americans a month? And then, of course, and I know some others on this panel think about this too, I think about international. This is very much a domestic-centric medium right now, heavily North American. When you, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later in the panel, when you think about bigger tech players coming in, like a little bit Amazon, but especially Google and Facebook coming into podcasting in the next few years, you start to think about this being an internationalized medium, and then all bets are off. And then it's like, instead of talking about 100 million Americans a month, you're talking about a billion or so international listeners a month. When I think about radio, sort of to Sarah's point, being part of iHeartRadio, it gives me scale. I'm able to flex deals into broadcast radio, but it also keeps in perspective for me that this medium is, and I mean this in a good way, is just getting started actually, which is exciting.
Well, I think a lot of our attendees will be happy to hear that. That's great news. Thanks. And I think the international piece is growing in importance as well. Several of you are having some of your shows translated. I know, Hernan, you're doing that with a lot of the Wondery shows, right?
We have Dr. Death and Business Wars as the main shows that we are releasing we have been releasing in multiple languages, and we're about to roll out new shows. I don't want to speak out of term, but that the number of shows that we want to release in multiple languages is going to expand this year.
Terrific. All right, I'm going to jump a little bit into something I think our attendees are greatly interested in, and that is the topic of talent and the IP pipeline. We hear a lot about this. You know, the IP conversation has evolved in terms of what creators should look for in their deals, how they should protect themselves, and flip side, of course, what you all look for in deals. We talked last week on our little prep call a little bit about the fact that celebrity doesn't always translate into success. And I think that will surprise a lot of people. But Moses, I'm going to have you kick this part of the conversation off. It's well suited to your background. What do you look for in talent? What advice and insights would you give to creators as they embark upon perhaps entering this space?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Connell cited 2 stats that I pay attention to every year to sort of determine whether or not podcasting has gone mainstream, so to speak. And that's the number of people who have ever listened to a podcast, which as of the last Infinite Dial, that was 55%. And then the number who listen every month. And as of the last Infinite Dial, that was 37%. Now, like Connell said, that means 2 in 3 people do not listen every month to podcasts. And so I interpret that as, podcasts have gotten validation, but we're at the early stages of it, and it's not quite a completely mainstream medium for that. And I think it was one of the research companies did a study on why people don't listen to podcasts, and oftentimes it's they haven't found the right show for them. So I think the influx of big name celebrities into podcasting, especially over the past year, as other types of production have halted. I've been halted by the pandemic, is a good thing for the medium overall, and it goes a long way toward making the medium more mainstream and broadening the base of listeners who are interested in podcasting. But all that said, I think sometimes there's this misconception that success or popularity in one medium will automatically beget success in podcasting, which isn't always the case. It's important that there's a reason for people to listen, particularly for non-scripted talk shows. Whether it's nostalgia for a crazy popular TV show like The Office with Office Ladies, or the host has a unique, strong, incredible point of view like a Brene Brown or a Michelle Obama. In every case, it's so important to the success of the show that the host really shows up for it and makes it a craft that they are taking seriously. One of my old colleagues once put it, you don't have a podcast, and a lot of people talk about having a podcast, you make a podcast. And so talent has to be on board with the idea that I'm investing the time in this to make this a craft that I'm committed to and being the best at. It's not just a paycheck. It's not, sometimes the dollar signs that people are seeing make them think, oh, it's just a paycheck. And I think for it to be successful, for a podcast to have longevity, they really have to put their foot into it to make it sustain over time. And so that's, for me, that's a big thing to look for, is someone, especially if you're talking about a talk podcast, someone that is doing it because they have a specific point of view that they want to put out into the world, and they feel like they can do it over a long period of time, not just for, you know, a handful of episodes. I think that's a big thing. And when you have that, then all the other pieces, whether it's the rev share economics or the IP, like we end up figuring out how to work all those other things out when you have that level of commitment to the medium from the talent who's entering it.
I would piggyback on that, at least from the revenue perspective, and say that there is a direct correlation to the connection that the host has to their audience and the effectiveness of the ad campaigns. Meaning it's a self-fulfilling prophecy for success when you do have a host that's in it. And that host, again, does not have to be a Hollywood person. They just have to have a true, real, authentic, living connection to their audience. And that's the magic of podcasting. And that's really the sort of life work of the people, you know, on this panel, but also, you know, to constantly sort of living on that razor's edge of how do you maximize that without killing it, right? How do you bring that to its full potential without crossing that line of spoiling it? And that dynamism is really kind of the fun part of it for me.
And I would say with that, I think that was all perfectly stated by you guys. And I think with that, with the space evolving, I think the content and the quality of content continues to grow and get better and better. That makes our jobs harder, but also more fulfilling that, you know, now everyone and their mother seems to have a podcast. So how do we find out, like, if A, they're committed to Moses's point, but B, do we think it can scale? What's the vision of this whole thing? And I think, you know, the challenging part / opportunity is when you're sitting in front of a pitch and you're listening to what the vision is. A, you got to believe that they're all in and that it can scale, because this is one of those spaces that, unlike anything else, as you guys all know, it can really expose you. You may think you have an audience, you come here and you find out because you're kind of out there. You can use all the marketing that you want, but you got to sustain that as well. But I think it's also fascinating to look at, you know, in terms of when you talk about the IP and all of that stuff and data and everything. It's funny, I was listening to a recent episode of Kara Swisher. She was our very first partner back in 2015, her podcast Sway, where she had Bella Bajaria on from Netflix. And it was funny, you think Netflix just goes on data. I'm going to pick this show just purely based on data. But I was fascinated and because she talked about how it wasn't just data. At the end of the day, it's about gut instinct. It's about what's your judgment. You hear the pitch, you hear the vision, and am I going to take a bet on that? Am I going to greenlight that show? Not just because data can influence all of us, which is a good thing. There's not enough in this space. That's coming more and more. But at the end of the day, when you choose a show, you are really betting on that show because you believe in it. That's our mentality. That's how we're very, very selective on it. But that's the end game here, that, you know, can we find hits out of this based on our gut instinct? And I find that to be a great interview if you guys haven't listened yet.
And Hernan, what percentage of shows would you say, you know, ballpark, actually go from podcast into that, you know, very desirable TV and movie pipeline?
I mean, all of the industry as a whole, it has to be a very small percentage for us. So we created so far about 55 original shows, and 19 are being developed for television. But being developed is one thing, getting ordered to series is another thing. We have 4, about to be 5 shows that are actually ordered to series. And one of the reasons why we are batting above the average over here is that when we greenlight one of those miniseries, those narrative storytelling shows, we're thinking with the same framework of a television development executive. We're thinking about characters, we're thinking about stakes, we're thinking about story, we're thinking about how we're going to get people to care about what's happening to each of the characters and how we're going to bring them from the first episode to the last episode.
So it's part of the thought process, but I think what I'm hearing from the group generally is make a great podcast first, right? And the rest will come.
It has to be. It has to be a great podcast first. If it isn't a great podcast first, then nothing else matters.
Interesting. Well, along those threads, let's carry that conversation over into monetization. You know, Chris and Sarah, you guys both have your roots deeply embedded in ad sales, starting out in that, you know, and then branching out into bigger and better and lots of different aspects of the business. But Sarah, I'd love to talk a little bit about how you see ad sales evolving in 2021. There's been so many tech changes. There's been, you know, with the consolidation comes some changes. But then I'd like everyone to kind of weigh in a little bit on what the trends are in revenue diversification, because it's so important. You can't just have a CPM based ad sales model, where you're selling host read ads. It's the opportunities are so much greater than that at this point.
It's true. It's absolutely true. I always say I like to think of ad products on a continuum. And on one end is the very sort of high touch, high end, custom and branded opportunities that are just crafted very specifically with the show and a brand. You take it in a notch, and then you have sort of integrations within the show with a brand. Instead of building something from scratch, it's something that lives in that show, is a part of that show, is of that show, and gets fed to a sort of excited audience. Then of course you do have the host reads. And then on the more efficient end of the scale, you've got audience reads or pre-produced or programmatic creative. So it's all about, as we talk to the holding companies about the strategy for approaching podcasts. If podcasting isn't a strategy, it's how do you approach podcasting for your brand? There are all of a sudden a variety of tools that you can use separately and in combination to really achieve what you want to achieve. And I think, right now there is that amazing mix because of the sort of prominence of dynamic ad insertion and the rise of data. But that efficient end of the spectrum is just going to get more and more sophisticated. So what you're going to see is a stratification of products, but also a stratification of value, right? Depending on, what you're trying to do. You're not going to use a hammer to, gently try to thread a needle. You're going to use a hammer to get, blunt impact, right? So the more sophisticated we can get about what is the right tool to use when for what brand, I think that's when we're going to get to that next level with the brand advertising community.
Chris, you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I mean, my side is mostly content, but obviously touch on all sides of the business. And I think, because all of us have been in this business for a while, I think the key value proposition for this space is definitely the host read, because sometimes, that is a true endorsement unlike you can get from any other space. So getting someone, like a Rachel Hollis or Brene Brown or anyone to do an actual read, and it's entertaining, just as entertaining the show, that really leads to people buying the product. We've seen that over and over. Andrew Yang is a great example of people buying these scooters just because he's talking about it, on the show. So that's a big part of it. But also, as the space evolves, gets more sophisticated, we have to be open to these other ways, the programmatic and dynamic insertion. It allows so many unique tools. And I think it's up to us as an industry to be careful not to lower the rates down too much, but to hold the rates strong. Again, using that value proposition of the host read, and not dip too much onto like, hey, this can't sound too programmatic or like a radio show. This is a podcast. We got to keep it kind of isolated that way while also growing with the industry, which is important. So many brands are coming in to test things. All these different groups here and in the space, it is about scale. So how do we network these things beyond just one show and build these up, giving brands a much bigger opportunity to buy into a targeted audience or something like that. So I think we just got to hold strong and continue to evolve, but also be careful to not lower the rates and not, go too above our skis here.
I do want to talk a little bit about the diversification, but first, how do you guys set expectations for creators when they come to you and you greenlight a show in terms of monetization? I always tell our authors, you're not going to get rich, at least right off the bat. But how do you set that expectation? Because I think there is this perception in the industry that every podcast makes millions of dollars. How do we deal with that as an industry?
I think, go ahead.
No, just transparency from our end.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's a pretty small percentage that is even making significant money at scale. So I think it's just about transparency, setting expectations, going in with, hey, here's the potential projections based on current audience, what it could do, but there's a lot of variables outside of just the download currency.
Yeah, it's a bit of an art to peg a forecast for a show that doesn't exist yet. That maybe if there's an entity that exists, if there's a celebrity, if there's a brand out there that's recognizable, that's a lever, but it's not a guarantee. So, I mean, at the end of the day, it's a math equation. And that math equation very quickly gets adjusted if for whatever reason the reality doesn't match the forecast. And at Stitcher, we have a very sort of nuanced process that we've perfected over years using, social media insight, marketing insight, gut, a combination of things to really peg where do we think this show will land. And sometimes we're, happily surprised that it exceeds that. And other times it doesn't hit it. So the numbers follow, and it does need to add up at the end of the day. Like, there's no sort of magical sort of fairy advertiser that's just going to swoop in with $1 million because a show is what it is. It has to sort of, harken back to something that's worth something, that has a rate that's reasonable at the end of the day. So it's very math based in my view.
Well, one thing I would add is that it's very different for the ongoing interview style shows, where advertising accounts for the vast majority of the revenue versus a miniseries, those narrative stories that take a long time to produce. Those are the ones that are options for television, and where eventually, if that show does get ordered to series, television could exceed the total advertising revenue for those shows. So for instance, for us as a whole, last year, we brought in 25% of our revenue came from sources beyond advertising. That includes television licensing, includes audio licensing, where we license to platforms like Stitcher and others the rights to release our shows without any ads, as we do on Wondery Plus, and the revenue that we derive directly for consumers on Wondery Plus. And for some shows individually, the share can be a lot bigger than 25%, obviously, because that's the overall revenue share for the company, which is tilted half between ongoing shows and miniseries.
Connell, how does it work at Iheart?
So I think the two things that really changed what somebody can make off of a podcast are dynamic ad insertion and audience targeting. The reason that changed a lot, what a creator can make, is because it meant that everyone on this call didn't necessarily have to go just try to sell that one show. That you could suddenly build in a network sale and bundle a bunch of media together onto a media plan like you normally do in digital media. Dynamic ad insertion came into the industry around about 2016-ish, and audience targeting came into the industry maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, where Moses was prior to this one at Megaphone. They led some of the charge on that. And it was a game changer for this industry. Hernan's right, though. There's two different kinds of really businesses here. There's an ongoing show where you can have regular advertisers in all the time. And then there's the sort of big launch limited series that's a harder sale sometimes. You have to go out and find just the right sponsor. Projections are hard. It'll be strong for 3, 4, maybe 5 months. Very different kinds of sales. At the end of the day, though, to be clear, like, these are happy problems. We have an audio podcast industry that for roughly a tenth the cost of video is driving a video CPM and now hitting scale. And so will a show be as successful as a Dax or a Conan or whatever the case may be, or will it not? Creators coming into it now, I think, have a sense that, like, not everything's going to hit, but when it does, it could be a real business for you.
Great. Let's change gears a little bit and talk about networks. I get asked this question all the time. Most creators nowadays, anyone entering the space, feels as though they're safer coming into a network and joining a network. What advice would you give to someone new to the space about whether they should go it alone, what kinds of resources they might need, or whether or not they would be best suited trying to shop their show around to the various networks? And how do they find the right fit? I think that's a really important aspect of joining a network. How do you find the right fit for a network? Chris, you want to start with that one?
Absolutely. I think it's how we all make strategic decisions. Kind of goes back to that gut instinct at the end of the day. I think when a talent or show, whatever approach they take, is probably going to talk to everyone on this call, certainly is probably going through the pitch just to make sure they hear all the differentiating factors of each group and what each group brings. At the end of the day, kind of my style and our style as a company at Cadence 13 is do we believe in it, right? We've got to believe in it. We've got to be set up on our side to be passionate about that type of programming, that talent, that show, that we can support that vision. But also, what are the needs of that talent, respectively? Are they looking to develop something pretty significant and ambitious? Is it just, hey, I've got my show, I just need ad sales? Do I just need production? Whatever it is, you got to kind of surround them, because they haven't usually, in most cases, been into this space. It's all brand new to them. So it's what do they need? And I think a lot of these networks have different capabilities, whether it's production, sales, marketing, distribution, all of that stuff. And then it's just all about, okay, zeroing in and trying to close that deal, depending on what it is. And we've started our company again back in 2015 with just that. We've gotten into originals and everything later. We started with that network model of the partnering of the shows with all that infrastructure. And I think we've done that strategically and on purpose, and it's worked out really, really well for us. But at the end of the day, to your point, it's all about what does that respective talent need and how can we support that with our talent investment, that sort of thing.
That's really good insight. Who else?
I mean, I can jump in here as well. I think, Chris, you had it exactly right. It's what is that show? What is that talent looking to do? And do we have the tools to be able to sort of amplify them in the way that they're looking to, or just to, give them whatever they need? I think having a listening app like we do at Stitcher, it's given us some really great insight, because not only our shows are heard on that app, but every show is heard on that app. So we can get a really good sense of what people gravitate to across all shows, and sort of where there are existing clusters of listening, where there is hunger for stuff. So we can sort of cross-reference what's coming at us to consider with where the audience is and what the desires are that we're seeing on that end. And so, you can kind of get a sense. It looks like, and we call them clusters, it looks like this show would very neatly fit into this comedy cluster, this earwolfy kind of cluster. We think that we could very easily ramp it up very quickly. Or this is something that we've never seen before. It's something that looks like nothing else we've ever seen. It'll really stand out. So we try to use data and analytics in addition to our guts to kind of determine if we can make a show successful in the network.
Yeah, I think I would just say, first of all, to answer your first question, Kathy, is like, if I'm a creator, I would try to go it alone a little bit. And I'm saying this as a network, so it sounds counterintuitive, because we want all the best creators to be part of the Iheart Podcast Network, but try to go it alone until you at least find a signal that you're onto something. Just brass tacks, it gives you more leverage when you go to negotiate a deal. That's obvious. But it also lets you figure out, like, what's my show about? What is my quote unquote voice in my podcast supposed to be about, without a bunch of stakeholders in the room? The rest of the decisions, I would make those as objective as you can. Do I need a lot of marketing? Meaning, I'm not famous. I want to grow fast and I need marketing. Okay, that's going to decide who you go to. Do I need a lot of production help, or can I take care of that piece completely on my own? That will decide who you go to. Do I want my show to be widely distributed all the time, available on every app, or do I want it to have an exclusive distribution model, which may define how much money I get up front or don't? These are kind of objective boxes you can check to steer you in one direction or another, to try to make it a little less emotional, if you will. But I think initially I would start it on your own. I really admire guys like Aaron Mahnke, who just quit his job and started Lore, and now he's got a whole thing with a bunch of shows. And he did that because he believed in himself as a creator. He thought he had a voice. He thought it was unique, and why not? And he was right. I would try that first.
That's great advice.
I agree. I think Connell hit the nail on the head. That's exactly right. And once you get to that step where you're able to talk to multiple networks, I would ask them the simple question: what can you do that X cannot do for me? Some people will care more about marketing. Some people will care more about different ways of monetizing. Some people will care more about momentum and being seen in the rankings. Some people will care more about the opportunity for or getting the personalized customer support, and then knowing who they can talk to in each of the networks. Everybody's going to need something different. So I definitely encourage people to start independent and then go to a network.
Great advice. Let's talk for just a moment about discovery. We've talked about how there's more work to be done on that front, although we've made great progress over the last couple of years. But where do you think this industry is headed in terms of distribution? Are we going to go the route of music and television and movies, where there's going to be multiple apps, each serving different types of audiences and some overlap? Or do you think people will continue to funnel through just the primary platforms that are out there now? Like, how do you see that part of our industry evolving?
First inning. I mean, first of all, I just say the most interesting thing to me are the distribution platforms that are not yet materially in podcasting. Just a future trip for a second. So Facebook doesn't have an audio-centric product. It has a video product. It does not actually have an audio product yet. That's phenomenal. That will change. It will launch an audio product, and then you'll one day to the next amplify podcast audiences, especially around the world, like we said. Audio in general, but especially podcasting, are still not super prevalent in search engine results. That will change. Google has said this. This is not news. Google has been very loud about this, that they like podcasts and want to treat them as they say first-class citizens in search results. Again, whole new discovery mechanism for podcasts, especially for international audience. You talk about billions of search queries happening every day. If podcasts even just a little bit start to appear in a bunch of those search queries, whether it's on black holes or air conditioners, very interesting new audiences that come into podcasting. But I think on the apps that we understand today, there's really two models working. There's exclusive paywall distribution, totally okay. It's okay business model. It makes a lot of sense, especially to drive subscribers for particular apps. And then there's wide distributed ad sales model, sort of the broadcast model. I think I'm interested to hear what other folks think. I think these two things live in parallel for a while. I don't know that it migrates to one or the other to the extent that TV has recently. I think they probably live in parallel and in harmony for a while, and maybe creator-driven for a while. What kind of creator wants his or her stuff out there widely and loudly? What kind of stuff just sort of wants a curated, paywalled, exclusively distributed experience on a Spotify or a Luminary or whatever the case may be? I don't know that there's a wrong model yet. It's part of the benefit of being technically still an emerging medium, although we're getting there as getting past that soon.
I also think it's still such an opportunity. Discovery is still so early, and it's an opportunity for someone to realize like there's something big out there, because it's still a little bit messy. It's still hard to discover. Still a lot of people who don't know how to get them. I also think we talk about international a lot, which is a huge opportunity, but I still think the opportunity in this country, in North America alone, middle of the country, is huge. It's still a very coastal type of medium. New York, LA, San Fran, DC, Boston, like those markets are very heavy. Middle of the country, massive opportunity. And I still think it starts with what's the podcast? You know, everyone wants that kind of Game of Thrones moment that it's critically praised, it's culturally praised, it's part of the zeitgeist, everyone's talking about it. You know, Serial was one of those tipping points for this space. Can we find that? So there's word of mouth, but the discovery of how to just get it simply, that's why I think it's great that all these big players like the Amazon, Spotify, Apple, everyone's accelerating the business. It helps all of us.
And I jump on Chris's point there too. What's fascinating to me about this medium, and I bet everybody on this panel feels this way, is like there'll be months where a whole new genre almost of content hits the medium. When Biden won the election, conservative talk podcasts were all over podcasting for a while. Now, they had been there previously to some extent, but now they're more prevalent. And it almost felt like, oh yeah, that's a whole genre of podcasts. This month and week, Bible podcasts are ranking super well. Again, it feels like to this panel, you're sort of like, of course, this is a whole genre that was sort of there before. I get it, but like not that prevalently there before. It feels like there's whole genres and categories that have yet to launch in podcasting, which also makes it kind of fun. You never know what's coming tomorrow.
Yeah, that's never been more true than today, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, that's all the time we have. You guys have done an amazing job today. Thank you so much for providing. I learned a lot, and I'm sure the rest of our audience did as well. Great insights, great, really actionable tips for them to employ as perhaps they embark upon their journey into podcasting. So with that, I will say thank you very much. Thank you again to Victor Harwood. And for the attendees, I hope you benefited from this experience today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. Thanks, everyone.
Great to see you.